Welcome to Module 3 on Challenging and Influencing Systems. Let's now hear again from Maria Munir, and let's meet Sakris Kupila, both activists fighting for gender recognition, to know what gives them the courage to continue advocating for human rights after a setback.
I think I developed an attitude in life that made me more resilient, which was the setbacks aren't necessarily a bad thing. They're something that we can use to draw on. So for instance, recently the UK government issued guidance for employers on non-binary gender. But then at the last minute when they published that guidance, they changed non-binary to just say undefined or non-specified. And that was a setback. But it gives us the opportunity to show people that, look, these institutions are kind of giving face value, opportunities to us and not necessarily changing their attitude. And if anything, that allows more people to unite and see, wait, hang on, it's not that easy to change institutions, and maybe we can join in. And I think that gives other people the courage to say, well, actually, it's not all about, those gold star successes and trophies. It's about the little struggles and overcoming them each time that I think gives us more power when we're doing our human rights work.
One of the hardest things in this fight for the law to change has been the feeling that you are not listened to. I got to a really low point a little bit over a year ago when I felt like I get no response, that I've been trying to tell the government and the people the same things over and over again, but they are always dismissing our pledge. They're always saying it's not a priority. They're telling lies about trans people. They are making up these scenarios. They are quoting the Bible, and they are really not thinking about the people behind this. I felt like I felt really powerless, but then after a while I got this email from Amnesty asking, hey, would you like to grab a coffee with us? We'll have a proposal. It's about global campaigning about trans rights. That was a glimpse of hope I needed. Up to that point, I had been so done with everything. But that was the thing I grabbed onto. That was the thing that pushed me again and made me keep going, that made me realize that, there is still hope.
Let's now reflect on the first steps in identifying a human rights violation. Listen to the following statements. 1. Murder contravenes the right to life, liberty, and security of person. 2. Kidnapping disregards the right not to be subjected to arbitrary arrest and detention. 3. Assault may infringe on the right to not be subjected to cruel and degrading treatment. What do these terrible acts have in common?
They are the most serious violations of human rights.
They are not necessarily human rights violations.
They're not violations because they're not human rights.
Not everything that is unjust counts as a human rights violation. Legally, a private person who commits these acts does not commit a human rights violation, but commits a crime, for which they should be held accountable under national law before national courts. In cases where the state is culpable, either out of negligence or an active role, these acts might lead to or constitute a human rights violation. Recall from the last module, who is the main duty bearer when it comes to human rights? Think about it for 5 seconds. The state is the main duty bearer, and it is the state who has to respect, fulfill, and protect human rights. Under certain circumstances, however, a murder scenario might constitute a human rights violation. The first case is if the state fails to take appropriate steps to prevent the murder of a person. For example, If the victim had approached the police and had told them about credible threats to his or her life, and the police did not act accordingly, the state's failure to act could amount to a violation of the state's obligation to protect and/or fulfill the right to life. The second case is if the state has not adopted the necessary legal provisions to prevent such acts. In this scenario, for example, if the state has not criminalized murder in its penal code, the state's failure to act accordingly could amount to a violation of the state's obligation to fulfill. The third case is if the state has adopted the necessary legal provisions but is failing to prosecute. The state's failure to act accordingly could amount to a violation of the state's obligation to protect. The fourth case is if the killing is committed by a state organ. For example, a police officer in duty arbitrarily killing a member of the public. Now you know that you have to take a closer look at the state's role to see whether a certain scenario really is a human rights issue, or whether it's a crime or an unjust situation. But you will also need to consider the next step. Is the right concerned an absolute or relative one? Not all human rights are absolute. In fact, most of them are relative. But what does that mean? When it comes to absolute human rights, they cannot be restricted under any circumstance. Every time the state interferes with these human rights, this is qualified as a human rights violation. When it comes to relative human rights, states can restrict these rights under certain conditions. The interference must have a legal basis, must pursue a legitimate aim, and must be necessary and proportionate. If any one of these conditions is not met, the interference or limitation is qualified as a human rights violation. Let's now check which human rights are absolute and which ones are relative. For 10 seconds, think about each of the following rights and guess if they are absolute or relative. The right to freedom of conscience and to change religion. The prohibition of torture. The freedom of expression. The right to be recognized as a person before the law. The prohibition of slavery. The right to an adequate standard of living. The right to liberty. The right to life. The right to a fair trial. Here are the correct answers. The absolute rights are freedom of conscience and to change religion, the right to be recognized as a person before the law, the right to a fair trial, the prohibition of torture and the prohibition of slavery. The relative rights are freedom of expression, the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to an adequate standard of living. So, as you can see, there are only a handful of rights that are absolute. These rights are at the very core of human dignity. Every interference with these rights is under all circumstances prohibited, as this would undermine the dignity of the person. All other rights are relative and can be limited under certain circumstances. For example, the freedom of expression, the right to liberty, the right to life, the right to an adequate standard of living, and many more. The guarantee of relative rights needs to include balancing considerations. The rights of one person can only go so far, as the rights of another person are not unduly interfered with. We are going to discover some of the positive efforts taken to protect and defend human rights around the world, and the impressive results making the world a more just and equal place. Let's see the progress in curbing torture and the efforts of human rights activists around the world to stop torture led to several countries taking progressive steps to end this practice. In Canada, following years of campaigning by Amnesty supporters, Canada finally pledged to prevent torture by committing to the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture. OPCAT. In 2016, Guinea made torture a crime, whilst Togo strengthened its law to bring it in line with international law. In the Philippines, a historic ruling on police torture saw the first conviction under the country's 2009 anti-torture law, which followed 3 years of steadfast campaigning by Amnesty activists. Let's now see what has been done regarding the historic vote abolishes death penalty. For 40 years, Amnesty International and other organizations have been working to end executions. When Amnesty International began that work in 1977, only 16 countries had totally abolished the death penalty. Today, that number has risen to more than 2/3 of the world's countries. For instance, after a parliamentary vote in 2017, Mongolia abolished the death penalty for all crimes, after Fiji and Nauru had done the same. Finally, let's consider regional human rights protection mechanisms. A milestone in human rights in the Americas was when in 1959, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights was established, monitoring how the rights included in the American Convention of Human Rights and other regional instruments are implemented in 35 American states, from Argentina to Canada. It can publish reports analyzing the human rights situation in a member state, and it can deal with complaints about human rights violations, issuing non-binding recommendations to the state concerned. In San Jose, Costa Rica, in 1979, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights was established, complementing the Inter-American Commission in enforcing human rights. The jurisdiction of the court has been accepted by just 20 states, but, unlike the Commission, its decisions are binding. Both bodies have had a crucial role in developing human rights standards and policies of reparations for their violations, including monetary compensation to victims, symbolic reparations, for instance, memorials, and demands for state reforms and criminal prosecutions of individual perpetrators. In Africa, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights was established in 1987. In order to monitor the rights included in the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, it applies to 54 of the 55 African states, which means it promotes human rights for around 1.2 billion people. The Commission receives state reports on the realization of human rights, as well as complaints by states and individuals. It can issue non-binding decisions about the existence of a human rights violation. The African Court of Human and People's Rights, established in 2004, complements the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. It can deliver binding judgments on human rights violations, including the order of remedies and reparations to the victim. So far, 8 states have accepted the competence of the court to receive complaints from individuals and NGOs. In Europe, since 1959, the European Court of Human Rights has been safeguarding the human rights listed in the European Convention on Human Rights, which has been accepted as binding by 47 states, from Portugal to Russia. This means that the court monitors the respect of these rights for more than 800 million people. The court can issue binding judgments on the existence of their violation and order payment of compensation to the individual or individuals whose rights have been violated. The state must then take steps to remedy the violation. This could include changing laws and policies, releasing wrongfully convicted prisoners, or ordering a retrial in cases where a conviction followed unfair proceedings. Let's see how you can take action by challenging politicians to act for human rights. So far, you explored how you can raise awareness for a human rights issue in the general public. Now you will find ideas on how you can activate for state representatives and politicians to take action. Public speaking, investigating, and researching and convincing others are some of the things that you can do. You can organize a public debate on a human rights issue of interest and invite public officials and friends to come along, or organize a panel discussion and invite a local politician to join the panel as a speaker or as part of the audience. You can also attend community meetings or political gatherings and take the floor when issues that concern human rights are discussed. Adding a human rights perspective to the political decision-making process is a very crucial task. You can research and share the facts, collect information in order to create a fuller picture of a certain human rights issue. You can use, for example, social networks, text messages, interviews in the streets, and talking to friends, colleagues, and family members to collect information. You can also organize a public exhibition with the results of the surveys and share the results with stakeholders and/or political representatives. Find out about the human rights obligations the state has to respect and which treaties it has signed. You may want to contact a lawyer or NGO active in the field and ask for their advice. Then write a letter to your political representatives or the local politician concerned, asking what they are doing to make sure these obligations are fulfilled. Share the outcome with the media or in other ways you have explored in Module 2. Write a letter to state representatives at home or abroad, urging them to stop a specific human rights violation, to change their policies and practices on a certain issue, or to intervene with other states who are committing violations. You can meet up with a politician. Find out who your political representatives are at local, national, and regional levels. Then, find out who is a good contact to bring forward your ideas. Find out if there are any other actors already lobbying for certain issues and possibly join forces. Contact local authorities who are responsible for a particular decision, and opposition politicians or others with influence over policy. Ask for a meeting or organize a public hearing and invite them to attend. Would you be able to assess your personal risk? It is important to be aware of the potential risks associated with taking action for human rights. Threats can be explicit and direct, for example, verbal intimidation, or they can be implicit and indirect, for example, a hostile environment. Vulnerabilities are personal. They define where or how a threat could harm someone. Capacities are sources of strength and support, which can increase security and safety. The following self-assessment questions can help guide your thoughts regarding what threats or risks you face on a regular basis. Do you regularly work or commute in an area that is unstable or dangerous? Do you work on a topic that is highly controversial in your area, or that the authorities and/or any other powerful groups would see as threatening to their interests? Do you have close family that could be targeted for retaliation? Now, let's think about what vulnerabilities you have that could make it easier to attack or harm you. Please take the time to reflect on the following questions. Do you carry sensitive information that could cause something to happen to yourself or others if it was stolen or misplaced? Do you carry a mobile phone that could be used to track your movements and/or communications? Are you well known for your work in your area, and could this increase the likeliness of attacks or harm? Finally, let's consider what strengths and capacities you have access to. Please take the time to reflect on the following questions. Do you have a working phone? And can you use it discreetly without being monitored? Do you have strong family or community ties that are supportive? Can you access adequate health care if you need it? Do you have access to legal advice and representation if you need it? Let's now consider some general tips to mitigate risks. Risk mitigation is often contextual. You will need to consider your own unique situation. However, there are some general guidelines that you can utilize to think about how to minimize your risks. The following recommendations offer an overview of how to reduce risk that may accompany taking action for human rights. When traveling, find alternate ways or times to travel to and from places you frequently visit, and vary the journey so that your movements are less predictable. Take a safer mode of transportation. For example, you can opt for a licensed or trusted taxi after a certain time at night, or travel together with friends. Regarding your surroundings, you can make your home and work environment safer. For example, by installing lights in dark corners, ensuring doors and windows have safe and secure locks, with no easy break-in points. Now, let's consider some tips related to the use of technology. First, have credit on your phone and carry a second fully charged battery or power bank with you at all times. Second, use Facebook, Twitter, and other social media carefully. Check if others can easily trace your movements using your social media accounts. Third, erase sensitive information from devices, such as phones or tablets, that could put you or your contacts at risk if traveling to a high-risk area. Fourth, ask yourself what you really know about tech security and staying safe online. Improve that knowledge or find someone who can help you improve your knowledge and capabilities. Finally, use safe passwords and change them regularly. Some tips on relationships are also important. Think about who you should let know where you are on a regular basis. Consider working with other people promoting human rights issues and travel in larger numbers. Think about who can publicly back you or can make statements supporting you that would help improve your credibility in the public eye. If you went missing, who would know? What can you do to ensure someone notices sooner? You could establish a regular check-in routine and a plan of action for what to do in case you miss a check-in. Be aware of your surroundings when having sensitive conversations. Now take pen and paper or record yourself to start a new activity where you can reflect on how you can act. Consider the following questions. How will you take action for human rights? What risks do you need to consider, and what steps will you take to mitigate risks? Let's now check your knowledge. You will listen to 10 questions. Question number 1. Select the statement that is correct.
Human rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated.
Human rights concern only civil and political aspects of our lives.
All human rights treaties are legally binding for all states.
Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is that human rights are indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated. Question number 2. Complete the sentence. Everyone has human rights simply because
They were granted to them by their government.
They are human beings.
They obtain these rights with their birth certificate.
Think about it for 5 seconds. Here, the correct answer is that everyone has human rights simply because they are human beings. Question number 3. Is it true or false that the right to liberty is considered to be more important than the right to education? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is false. Question number 4. Is it true or false that an adequate standard of living, including food, water, housing, and medical care, is a human right? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is true. Question number 5. What are the human rights obligations of the state?
Respect, adjudicate, and fulfill.
Respect, protect, and fulfill.
respect, protect, and finance.
Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is respect, protect, and fulfill. Question number 6. Is it true or false that a private person who murders somebody commits a human rights violation, not a crime? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is false. Question number 7. Select the correct statement.
Every time a human right is limited, we also call that a human right violation.
The majority of human rights are absolute.
Every time the state interferes with an absolute right, it is qualified as human rights violation.
Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is that every time the state interferes with an absolute right, it is qualified as human rights violation. Question number 8. Is it true or false that taking action for human rights requires special education and years of experience? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is false. Question number 9. Complete the sentence. Some human rights courts can issue legally binding judgments, which means that
the state has to follow the judgment and pay compensation, change its laws and practices.
The state does not need to follow the judgment but has to apologize to the people concerned.
The state can choose whether or not to implement the judgment and will be rewarded if the judgments are implemented.
Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is that the state has to follow the judgment and pay compensation, change its laws and practices. Question number 10. Is it true or false that only states play a role in the protection and promotion of human rights? Think about it for 5 seconds. The correct answer is false. We hope this course fulfilled your expectations, and you are now able to reflect on how human rights relate to your daily life. The importance of speaking up for human rights, the different roles of key actors in promoting human rights, including your own role in defending and promoting them to influence others to act. We hope that now you're also able to assess and mitigate risks when taking action for human rights. By completing this course, you have further developed your knowledge and skills to defend your rights and those of others, so that this need not be the end, but just the beginning of your journey into human rights. Let's now listen to the final message from Maria Munir, Guadalupe Marrego, and Sakris Kupila.
There is much power in a community that I didn't necessarily feel when I was growing up, because it's very easy to feel isolated when you're working on an issue, especially one that isn't necessarily picked up by mainstream activists. Especially, if you feel like you're in a rural community, or you might be, young, you might feel like you don't have enough qualifications to work hard. But you know what? That's how I felt once. But I'm in a place now where I feel like I can look at other people in the community that I know and say, hang on, I can be like them. They too started from a different place. So I think the first thing you need to do is find someone who feels the same way you do. Then look at how other people make you feel and why they make you feel that way. Unpick, who is it that's got this power over me? Is it my local government? Is it my family? Is it my friends? Is it the teachers? Is it the law enforcement? And see, what is it that you possess that you feel could help change those attitudes? Because it's the attitudes that need to change before people sign the legislation and put it into power.
I would tell not get frustrated. There's, join organizations perhaps like Amnesty or others take it personally and do something about it, because at the end you do get there. Sometimes it takes long, like for example, people might remember that it took 30 years for the cases, the grave human rights violations that a dictator like Pinochet had committed to come to the light and to get people into prison. And have justice for those people, but so sometimes it takes a long time, but I mean if we persist, we get there in the end.
What I would like to tell is that this is a long process. You cannot change the world at once, you cannot change the world in a lifetime probably, but you can start the change, you can be a part of the change, you can make it better for my siblings, you can make it better for your siblings, you can make it better for your kids, you can make it better for even the people around you, anyone really. And you can't do it alone, and you don't have to do it alone, because the power is in the people, the power is in numbers, the power is in the whole mindset of the whole society, and you are contributing to that by speaking up, and that's the most important thing you can do. And apart from that, just be yourself, just wake up in the morning, go on with your life, just exist, because there are no human rights without human beings, there is no movement without normal regular people, there aren't any activists without people like me who just become active. You just need to be you and to be human and to have compassion and to be a little bit brave.